Dr. Murray Goldstein is the first osteopathic physician to serve as a commissioned medical officer in the United States Public Health Service, where he rose to the rank of Assistant Surgeon General. His decades-long career with the NIH led to numerous achievements and accolades, yet he remains humble, humorous, and willing to lift others up so they may carry the torch forward. A true trailblazer.
For many, many, many years, the osteopathic profession was completely isolated from the medical profession. The people, the officers of the medical profession had come to a decision that osteopaths, DOs, were not adequately prepared to provide health care nationally. This was frankly a political decision, but okay. The time had come in the early 1950s, osteopathic physicians were growing in number nationally and had to be recognized as such. And so the osteopathic profession decided to test the blackball against osteopaths nationally. And it had decided to use the U.S. Public Health Service as its instrument. One of the reasons for this was a man by the name of Nelson Rockefeller. Mr. Rockefeller had been governor of New York for many years, a member of the famous Rockefeller family, and was at this time an assistant secretary in the Federal Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. And the U.S. Public Health Service was one of the organizations that was managed and controlled by the Public Health Service. Incidentally, Mr. Rockefeller's personal physician was an osteopathic physician. And so they had decided the time had come to test the role of osteopaths for the future. In order to join the Public Health Service, one had to take an examination, a medical exam. This was true across the board. And then, shall I say, survive an interview. How they chose a young osteopathic physician in Des Moines, Iowa, affiliated with the school there, I have no idea. They never shared that with me. What had happened behind the scenes, that I later learned about, is Mr. Rockefeller, the Assistant Secretary of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, and his doctor, an osteopathic physician, had decided to break the blackboard. And that's what was happening. Again, I have no idea, none at all, how they found a young man in Des Moines, Iowa, to serve in this role. Well, of course, I was learning research, and I'm a very slow learner. It took me 40 years. Well, I went to work in the Heart Institute, had a wonderful, wonderful man who helped me learn research. And for reasons I had been interested when I was in Des Moines in the area of stroke. I just wondered, why did people have strokes? And why did certain people, like blacks, have more stroke than whites? Why did that happen? Et cetera, et cetera. And so I started my own research program under my sponsor's guidance in stroke research. In 1993, I became director of the Neurology with absolutely no research program of my own. I was responsible for the institute. It had a $500,000 a year budget. It had 80 people working on the campus, and my hands were full. Well, when I became director, I very carefully sat down and reviewed all the research that the Neurology Institute and its staff was doing. And they were doing a very good job. But I noticed one thing, that all of the research, remember this is Neurology Institute, all of the research was focused on disorders with adults and was doing very well, but practically nothing was going on in the area of childhood neurological disorder. And I went into consultation with a number of people on the staff, and we agreed for us to include developmental neurology. That means development of the brain and its difficulties. And the most obvious one was cerebral palsy. Yeah. And so the decision was not made from cerebral palsy to the Neurology Institute. It was for a new leader to try to fill in gaps and deal with cerebral palsy. And so I put some money aside, got a few good people thinking about it, and we started a small cerebral palsy research program. In reviewing it, I learned that we knew practically nothing about it, and that but nearly all of the information was suppositions, and that the evidence, the scientific evidence, wasn't there to back it up. And so we started slowly working. And my leadership team, I can't take credit for it, I was just part of the team, came to the recognition that maybe the supposition was not correct as to why cerebral palsy occurred. So we went looking, and we started some programs, not only on our campus, but making funds available outside to investigators. And I'm sorry to say we didn't get very much interest. It wasn't a hot topic. These investigators were working in their own field. Okay. But anyway, we started. And I say one of my accomplishments is turning the attention of NIH to a thing we called cerebral palsy. In 2003, I've been director 10 years. I resigned. And I resigned from the public health service and just turned it over. This was a Friday that I resigned, and word got out very fast. And out of the clue, a very skilled neurologist who was the chairman of neurology at Johns Hopkins called me. His name was Guy McCann. And Guy said, "Murray, I hear you're retiring." I said, "Yes, that's right, Guy, I'm retiring." He said, "What do you plan to do?" I said, "Improve my golf game." He said, "No, seriously, do you have anything in mind?" And I said, "No, I didn't." And Guy said, "Well, a position has just opened up, and I'm head of the search team looking for it, and it is to become the director of the Cerebral Palsy Research Center. And interestingly enough, its headquarters is in Washington, D.C., in your backyard." Well, to make a long story short, I took the job and became the director of the Cerebral Palsy Research Foundation. The organization had a board of directors. These were wealthy people who served on the board gave the organization overall vigilance and provided the money. And so I decided to take the sleepy board of directors and try to invigorate. And so I looked around, kept a few of the older ones. That's new. As the president of the board of directors, I was able to influence a man by the name of Leonard Goldstein. Leonard was the founder and president of a new television station called Channel 5. He was its director. And then I asked Leonard, could he help me find some other of stature and who had money? And he introduced me to a chap by the name of Paul Volcker. Paul was the chairman of the Federal Reserve, very wealthy man, a very vigorous man. He didn't allow much grass to grow under his feet. And Leonard introduced me to Paul. We had a conversation, and Paul agreed to join the board. And so using this kind of methodology, I was able to put together a new board of directors made up of very wealthy. And so my board became a very influential board. And we had a lot of discussion about why cerebral palsy research was not going anywhere. And it wasn't because the projects were being turned down. People wanted to apply. And so we came up with the idea that maybe our program ought to start by developing new investigators. And so we started a program of making small grants, research $50,000 a year, etc. We're making grants of $50,000 a year, each of 3 years, to young investigators who just started, and the temptation of getting, quote, easy money attracted them to working in that area. That area was so. We were getting money on new horses who were just entering the race. And if they would work in our field, we would give them startup money. By the way, they could not apply for a second grant. They got the first grant, and if it was successful, go to NIH. My second accomplishment, if I can use that term, was recruiting a whole new group of young investigators to work on a problem called cerebral. And the board of directors was enthusiastic about it and provided the funds necessary. And my third and last achievement was, as I told you, the United Cerebral Palsy Association, which was the mother organization of all the state cerebral palsy organizations, was right there on the same floor in our office in Washington. And I was their medical consultant. And learned from them what was going on locally. And suddenly, something kind of captured my attention. And that was cerebral palsy was considered a problem of the developing brain and influenced babies and young children at the clinical care level, which United Cerebral Palsy was. It wasn't research. But at the clinical care level, 99% of the program of providing family and patient services was for these little children, which made sense. But you know, little children grow up to be bigger children, and children grow up to be adults, and they have cerebral palsy too, and they need help.
Yeah.
They need help in the activities of daily living. It's not research, but it's help with food, with employment, with social activities, with even getting health care. And so I started asking questions about why in these clinics all over the country, cerebral palsy clinics, they only took care of children. Why didn't they take care of grown-ups? And there was a deadly silence. It wasn't that they were against it. They just were so involved with what they were doing that they hadn't given it much attention. And so the word went out to the cerebral palsy clinics to take them out of the pediatric units and make them hospital units that took care of children and adults. And so a national program was opened up to take care of adults with cerebral palsy and help them with their lives. And as you see, I consider that important because they had been ignored. Well, that's the story of my life in cerebral palsy. I think it laid the groundwork for national and international endeavors. I think it is still working hard. We've got some amazing research results. And as you know much better than I, the adults with cerebral palsy are now a part of our family.
Do you have any advice for current researchers and clinicians?
Well, you can always have advice, but the important part of it is important, right? Yeah. When I was director of neurology, I would interview young men and women who were just starting their careers in the neurology institute. And I said to them, if you're successful in every project you undertake, you're not doing anything important. The hard questions are the ones that are going to be important. And you know what? You will fail in an individual project more often than you'll win. But in your failure, you'll learn something. Every failed project teaches you something. And then you select from those things for the next project. And if I meet an investigator who's always successful, I say they're not on the cutting edge. They're doing the safe things. If you're on the cutting edge and you have the courage to fail, but also the ability to examine your failure so that the next time you use the failed information as a basis of the new. So don't be afraid to fail. Take on the hard. Take on the hard.
How do you want to be remembered?
As a man who tried. As a man who tried.
Yeah.
Who didn't sit back and enjoy the luxury of his titles. I ended up as a 2-star admiral. What the devil does that mean? Sit back here with little stars on my shoulders. But the important thing is your failures, not your success. Learn from your failure and take the next step.